District of Conservation is sponsored by the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, better known as CFACT. To learn more about our sponsor, head over to cfact.org. Thanks for listening to the program.
Ah, Smart Water. Pure, crisp taste.
That's really good water.
It's the kind of water that says, I have my life together.
I do feel more sophisticated.
Smart Water. For those with a taste for taste. Grab yours today.
Get lost in the acoustic brilliance of 3D audio that surrounds you. Feel the embrace of the massage seats that adapt to your every move. Experience the warmth of a vehicle that welcomes you as you approach. We could tell you what makes a Lincoln SUV so extraordinary, but don't take our word for it. Take it on a test drive at the Lincoln Summer Invitation with exclusive offers on now, only at your local Lincoln retailer.
Welcome to District of Conservation. I am your host, Gabriella Hoffman. This podcast offers a sober examination into all things hunting, fishing, shooting sports, energy, environment, and the public policy surrounding it. And this podcast also specializes in original interviews that you won't hear elsewhere. Here's what I have for you today. Plastics pollution is a very common topic here in the United States. Whether or not that's occurring is up for debate. And we have one of the foremost people, a plastics expert, Dr. DeArmitt, today on the podcast to talk about this in wake of the UN Plastics Treaty falling by the wayside. And we're going to ask about common misconceptions about plastic use and if some of the fears placed on microplastics, styrofoam, and the like are misplaced or justified. Dr. DeArmitt, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, and thanks for caring about science and evidence.
Describe your background for listeners who might be unfamiliar with your work, please.
That's the funny thing. What I'm talking to you about today is not my job. I got involved. So I'm a plastics, a polymer scientist. I've got a PhD in polymer science and chemistry. And so my job is to make better materials and solve problems. That's my paid job. And I only got involved in this environmental stuff because my own daughters came home from school and they'd been lied to by their teachers. They were told that plastics don't degrade, and that's just an outright lie. So that made me angry because we shouldn't grow up in a world where our daughters and our sons are taught nonsense at school and grow up believing stuff that's just not true. That can't have a good ending. So I got personally involved reading 5,000 studies, unpaid, completely unpaid. It took me 5 years to then share the science for free. And that's why I'm talking to you today.
And you came very highly recommended. And I like to bring on people who are scientifically inclined, who know the weeds of these topics. And I think people don't understand how ubiquitous plastics are. And I'm not excusing any pollution. Nobody's excusing pollution. We want to have, of course, proper stewardship and usage. But very similar to fossil fuels and other vilified energy sources, plastics are inescapable in society. Here in the United States, you find plastic usage very common. Elsewhere around the world, Western Europe, very common there too. And I wanted to get your thoughts, Dr. DeArmitt, also on this falling out from the UN Plastics Treaty. For those unfamiliar, I mean, the UN has all these different treaties. They're non-binding because our Senate in the United States, for context, has never formally entered into a lot of these treaties. So they're very null, don't really have an impact, and we shouldn't be abiding by them because they're often used as a means to enact very misguided policies, to restrict freedoms, to punish production and the like. So what is the takeaway from this agreement not being reached? Is it good for the United States and the Western world? What's your overall takeaway from this?
Yeah, well, as a scientist, my view is let's do sensible things based on stuff that's true. So the treaty, a proposed treaty, is based on stuff that just isn't true. So, for example, we have even like people like the head of SC Johnson. He's a wonderful guy called Fisk Johnson, very well-meaning guy. And even he, who should know better, has got misinformation on his website, and he's out there in Geneva campaigning for things that, based on information that's just not true. So, and here's one of the biggest ones. They say that there's some kind of ocean emergency and 8 to 12 million tons of plastic go into the ocean every year, and that there's some floating islands size of Texas. And that's just not true. That was a complete guess made by somebody with zero evidence, and it's disproven by decades of studies of ships going up and down, sailing millions of miles with nets behind them, looking for this plastic that just isn't there. So that's just one example. As you said, I'm not trying to excuse plastic. There shouldn't be plastic in the ocean, but neither should we lie about it. We shouldn't generate emergency so that we can make ourselves feel important and fly around to Geneva and all around the world to talk about an emergency that we created ourselves. That doesn't make sense either.
Who is the biggest but who is guilty of plastics pollution most? Because I was looking over the charts. I wanted to see if the U.S. is on a give these people the benefit of the doubt. And I look in the top 10, we often don't see the US in recent markers and recent, I would say, rankings. So who is the worst perpetrator of plastics pollution?
Great question. Yeah, that's really a great question. So we're made to feel guilty, right? Like people in the US and Europe are creating this mess. And as you said, it's not true. If you look at the science, we have the measurements on it. And it's coming from underdeveloped countries that just, they're not bad people. They just haven't caught up with us yet. And that tells us two things. One is that if you have proper structures like we do, we know the answers. It's not like some great mystery, right? We pay taxes when we buy products, and that pays for trash cans and waste collection and disposal and all of that. It works all around the world, but some countries just haven't implemented it yet. So it's not some great mystery waiting to be solved. And then the other question is, why would we be made to feel guilty for a mess that we're not creating when our junk is not in the ocean, when the junk from Europe and Japan and so forth is not in the ocean? Why are green groups, so-called environmental groups, telling us that we should feel guilty and we should donate? And the answer is simple. We're the ones with the money. You can't go to poor people in the countries that are not managing their waste properly and throwing it in the river and ask them for money because they don't have any money. So their strategy, their business strategy, is to tell lies, tell us that it's our fault when it isn't, and then expect us to feel guilty and open our pockets. And that's what's driving all of this.
I want to ask you about microplastics, because with this Make America Healthy Again movement and from the right, politically speaking, and we also have heard these concerns with environmentalists on the left, that there is this fear placed on microplastics. We're consuming it by wearing certain items or drinking water or drinks from plastic water bottles. Can you explain what microplastics are and if we should be frightened by their presence in the environment? Should we be consuming them? Should we not be consuming them? Are they very hard to trace? What goes into microplastics?
Wonderful question again. Wow, I'm really impressed. So I've read, because there's so much emphasis on this, I've read 5,000 studies in total on plastics in the environment, and that includes over 500 on microplastics. So I'm probably the world's leading independent expert, and that's not to boast. It's just to say I'm the only one dumb enough to read 500 studies without getting paid for it. So the funny thing is, if you look at so microplastic is just dust, right? It's particles of solid plastic. They're below 5 millimeters, which is like a quarter of an inch, and all the way down to dust sized. And the funny thing is that we're very comfortable with dust, right? We've breathed in dust for hundreds of thousands of years, and we don't give it a second thought. You and I are breathing in dust as we talk. So why should we be suddenly worried about these plastic particles of dust? And the reason people are worried is that they perceive it as a new, unstudied threat. And none of those three things are true. It's not new because we've known about microplastics. We've got 50 years of studies. It's not unstudied because we have over 1,000 studies on it. And it's not a threat because they're non-toxic. So then you have to ask yourself why. So just to give you some perspective, lifetime consumption of microplastic is not a credit card a week. It's 0.005 grams in your lifetime. And even that passes right through your gut without causing any harm. You could literally eat a coffee cup full of plastic pellets every day for months and nothing would happen to you. That's what science says. So again, these so-called green groups are making millions of dollars by scaring the bejesus out of us all day long and hoping for our donations. And it's really shocking, and somebody should do something about it.
That's very interesting. And it's very similar to forever chemicals. And I'm not endorsing the wholesale consumption of it, but a lot of products use forever chemicals. I like to go fly fishing, and my waders are made of forever chemicals or substances, petroleum byproducts that happen to be classified as forever chemicals. And if you were to get rid of that, there's one, no substitute, and two, the phase out of forever chemicals, the rushed phase out, kind of similar to microplastics, would create a lot more expensive alternatives that don't yet exist to replace it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So banning a class of substances is very lazy. Somebody, I like to make the analogy, there's many Jacks, but there's a million Jacks, but only one Jack the Ripper, right? So let's say you have a bunch of chemicals that contain, I'm a PhD chemist, right? So I really understand the chemistry of these molecules. So everything with fluorine in is classed as a PFAS or a forever chemical. And some of them are dangerous and should be regulated, and some of them are completely safe and should not be regulated. This idea that lazy politicians or lazy environmental groups should throw 1,000 chemicals into one bucket as if they're the same when they're not. I mean, one example is if you took water, H2O, and then you change it just by one hydrogen, so now you have H2O2, you've changed water into hydrogen peroxide, which you cannot drink. It's lethal. It's what you use to dye your hair with. So this is the reason why we can't can't just take molecules that look a little bit similar and put them in the same bucket and lazily classify them as the same when they're not. Some of these things, as you said, cannot be replaced, and we would have serious medical emergencies. And even, I'm not sure if we can ever get off planet Earth without fluoropolymers, for example, which are completely safe, like Teflon. So this is just really, really irresponsible legislation and science. And I was lucky enough recently to be asked to give a briefing to the US State Attorneys General about this. And they were just stunned because they'd never seen the science before. And when I showed it to them, like, oh, we see this doesn't make any sense, all this legislation. It's just, it's not backed by science. It's just backed by scare policies and scare tactics.
I want to ask you about the efforts, whether here in the US or abroad, to wholesale ban plastics. So very popular here by the political left is a maneuver to ban plastic bags. And I see this firsthand in my county. I live in Northern Virginia in a place called Fairfax County. We've had, I think for the last couple of years, a 5-cent tax instituted for any purchase of a plastic bag. Or they ask you to do like a paper bag, you pay 5 cents as well. Yeah. And in places where this has been attempted, New Jersey and a couple places, and I think the same will happen here, I've seen this interesting paradox where the prohibition goes into effect, yet we often hear and see as a result, more plastics, ironically, more plastic bags in particular, wasted in the process. So explain this paradox. This is supposed to discourage use of plastic bags, but in places like New Jersey, it's shown to actually produce more plastic bag waste. Why is that?
Yeah, plastic bags is one of the most interesting cases and one of the most studied scientifically. So the only way to know what option, we have a lot of alternatives, right? So how do we responsibly choose the one with the least impact? The only way to do that is a thing called a life cycle analysis. It's been developed over decades. Governments and NGOs and companies trust it. It's peer reviewed, so you can't cheat, and it's systematized, so you have to go and get your numbers from standard databases. And if you look at life cycle studies of grocery bags, there are 30 of them in the world. I've got every one of them on my computer. And I had them examined by a life cycle expert, and he agreed with what you would read as a layperson from looking at these studies. Every life cycle study in the history of the world shows that the polyethylene bag has least impact. So it's not to say it has no impact, it's not to say it doesn't litter, it's not to say that it's perfect, but it has the least impact. So why would you ban or tax the option that's the best for everyone and for the environment? It just makes things more expensive and harms the environment. It means more waste, more litter, more greenhouse gas, and so forth. It's not just greener in one way, it's greener in almost every way you can measure. So this is an example. And so exactly as predicted by all these studies, when you ban the greenest option, you end up making things worse. So the New Jersey ban, they studied, as you just mentioned, the effects of the ban, and there were two effects: vastly more greenhouse gas because the alternatives are worse for the environment, and ironically, vastly more sales of plastic, because when you can't reuse your grocery bag as a trash can liner, you have to go and buy an actual plastic trash can liner, which is 5 times thicker. So it would be a very cunning trick for the plastics industry to encourage plastic bag bans and sell a lot more plastic, because that's exactly what happens. And that's exactly what happens when people enact policies before they do their homework. And you're not asking for a lot here, because if you were to go to Google right now, go to your Google search bar and type in LCA for life cycle analysis bag, and you'll find the studies that I found. It takes literally 5 seconds to find these studies. So why hasn't Greenpeace or the World Wildlife Fund or Ellen MacArthur Foundation or any of these companies that claim to be for the environment, why haven't they in the last 10 or 20 years ever gone to the Google search bar and done their homework? It's a mystery, isn't it?
This seems to be a recurring theme with the push for clean energy. The supposed benefits, we're always told that there's going to be these benefits to transitioning or phasing out certain things, derivatives like plastics or fossil fuels, but they're never honest about the environmental trade-offs, which, as we are talking now, are ultimately worse for the environment than using the conventional product or service, which might be carbon intensive, that oft vilified carbon intensive product or good or service. With that respect. So this always seems to be a recurring theme. They don't really have a plan for end of life. They don't tell people honestly, like, this is what's going to happen with recycling or the lack thereof, that it actually could be worse for the environment, emissions wise or not, more costly. It's always more costly, but they're never honest about the environmental negative trade-offs as well.
That's exactly it. There's a really famous economist called Thomas Sowell, and he says some of the wisest things, and I quote him all the time. I've got a couple of his books behind me on my bookshelf, and one of the things he likes to say is, when you hear a suggestion, ask yourself 3 questions. What are the alternatives? How much does it cost? And where's the evidence? And when it comes to plastic, nobody's asking those questions. And that's what I shared with the US State Attorneys General when I was presenting them and showing the facts, that when you look at the evidence, plastic does have an impact, but it has less impact than everything else. And if you were to encapsulate this almost in one sentence, plastic, this is going to shock your listeners. Plastic is 1/2 of 1% of the materials we use. So yes, it is ubiquitous. It is everywhere. But if anyone was genuinely worried about using too much materials or waste, they wouldn't be talking all day long about 0.5% of the problem. They'd be talking about the other 99% as well. And in 9 cases out of 10, plastic has least impact compared to the other alternatives like paper, metal, or glass, or cotton. So that's what science says. And it's not cherry picking. It's not close. That's why I read 5,000 studies unpaid to read every single study and make sure it was right. And then I even had my findings checked by professors all around the world to make sure it was correct. And it is. It's endorsed. My book is endorsed. My free book is endorsed by professors all around the world because the science is solid.
Related to plastics is also styrofoam. And we've seen here in certain what you call blue states, progressive states, that they've also have an aggressive tactful approach to phase out and discourage the use of styrofoam. I think in Virginia, predating my current governor, his predecessor instituted a phase out for PETs, I think. And then I think California also has styrofoam ban. So explain the logic there. Is it the same thing, the same treatment that plastics get? Like, is it unnecessarily being vilified and attacked? And what happens with alternatives? Are they worse for the environment? What are the trade-offs?
Yeah. In general, if you look at impact and life cycle studies, you find out that the cheapest or the lightest solution, the one it makes sense, right? What's the material that I can use least of to make a cup or to make a bag or to make some insulation? And when you look at polystyrene foam, it's 97 or 98% air. And that means when you hold a piece of it in your hand, you think, oh, goodness, look at all this packaging. But really, it's an optical illusion like David Copperfield, because what you're looking at is 98% air and only 2% polymer. So it's incredibly effective and very, very low impact. If you look at the life cycle studies, polystyrene foam often has the least impact because you're just making something out of air. And plus you can recycle it, which is done in huge amounts. Plus it's non-toxic. And then people say, well, it's bad because it doesn't degrade. And that's not true either. It does degrade and biodegrade under the right conditions. So every reason that people are against plastic and expanded polystyrene is just categorically wrong according to peer-reviewed science.
What else about plastic should my listeners take away from our conversation that we haven't touched upon? Because some people might be thinking, oh, this is plastics apologia. They're doing this. But what else in terms of their ubiquitous nature or other misconceptions about their use? If we were to, let's say, maybe this is the question I want to ask you, Dr. DeArmitt, but if you were to phase out every single instance and item of plastics, would it have a dent overall on the environment? Maybe that's where I want to go with our conversation.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple answers to that. One is, on average, when you replace plastic, you need 4 times more material to do it, paper, metal, or glass. That generates 4 times more waste. You generate 3 times more greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide, and you use twice as much fossil fuel, and you increase cost and litter, right? So that is the impact. And I'm very careful to never say anything positive about plastic. You know, plastic companies and environment associations like to tell you about medical uses of plastic and Kevlar vests and, you know, how your baby incubator, your baby wouldn't have survived without plastic. I always avoid doing all that stuff because it seems really cheesy to me. So what I did for my latest book is I went to ChatGPT and I asked ChatGPT what would happen if we were to get rid of plastics. And it said civilization would collapse within hours. And people don't realize that. They don't appreciate that. For example, and ChatGPT went on to explain why. And one of the reasons is that every electrical wire coming to your house and in your house is insulated with plastic. So if you could imagine living in your house with no electricity, no heat, no internet, no computers, no cell phones, all of it would be gone. And all the defibrillators would be gone. You know, pretty much everything would be gone. Everything that makes society what it is today. We'd all be living in caves trying to send each other smoke signals telling us plastic is bad, because we wouldn't be able to call each other on the phone. So it would be pretty dire. And that's, as you said, not to apologize for plastics, but just to point out the stark reality of how idiotic it would be to get rid of the greenest and cheapest option we have.
Anything else you want to add to our conversation?
One thing I'd like to say is I'm non-partisan. I do work for free. This has all been peer-reviewed and checked, right? This information I'm sharing has been out there for years, and nobody's ever found a single error in it. And I don't care what people buy. I would choose an aluminium can or a glass bottle over a PET bottle any day of the week. It feels better in the hand, prefer to drink out of it, all of that. I am not telling you to go for plastics. All I'm telling you is don't make bad decisions based on lies. That's not how our children should grow up. Politicians shouldn't be forcing us into paying more to make the world a worse place. And that's exactly what's going on now. So I appreciate your opportunity you've given me to put some of the facts out there. And if anyone doesn't believe me, please go on the website. It's the Plastics Research Council. It's a non-paid, non-profit. Nobody works for a single penny. We put all the science out. We share it verbatim, copied and pasted from the study. So it's word for word what the study says with a link so you can go and check it yourself.
I like to use glass bottles and canisters as well, especially when I'm traveling. There's nothing wrong with that. I also have to use plastics when need be. So equal opportunity user of what works best. And I think everyone wants to have choices in terms of their silverware, their drinkingware, and the like. And we will be sure to link to your website and all the derivatives you mentioned. Dr. DeArmitt, it was a pleasure to talk to you. If you have any more updates about plastics, please come back on the podcast. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
It really was.
If you enjoyed this installment of District of Conservation, I would love to know your feedback. Send it my way. Please be sure to leave us reviews on Apple, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are played. And also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to never miss a beat nor a guest announcement. Thanks so much for listening to District of Conservation. I hope you have a wonderful day. And please share the podcast to those who may be interested in learning more about these critical natural resources, environment, energy issues.